I started to worry, wondering if a thief was in our house. I frowned at the sight of men's and women's shoes by the entrance. Our house should be empty since neither my husband nor I were supposed to be home. Yet I could sense someone was there, both at the entrance and in the bathroom. The loud, crude voice coming from the bathroom made it clear that someone was enjoying themselves. It's not unusual for husbands to invite their mistresses over when their wives are away, but that couldn't be the case here. This voice couldn't have been my husband's. He was standing right next to me, staring at the bathroom with a pale face. "My name is Jessica, and I've been married to Adam for 3 years. We both work, so we don't have any children yet. However, I believe we have a peaceful and loving life, spending our days off going out or traveling. Thankfully, neither our parents nor in-laws pressure us about having children. In fact, they live nearby, which allows us to maintain a good relationship and gather for family dinners. The slightly old but beautiful house we rent was recommended to us by our in-laws. We usually host dinner parties once a month, and when we do, my mom and I prepare the meal, enjoying the evening with Dad's favorite wine and the food brought by our in-laws. On that day, Mom had come over in the morning to help prepare for the dinner party, but she seemed unusually quiet and a bit down. While cutting the ingredients, she expressed concern, saying things like, "Do we really need this much? We might not be able to finish it all." This was not like her. "Mom, what's wrong?" "We've only prepared the usual amount for today," I asked. She looked at me with surprise and then laughed it off. "I'm sorry, dear. It's just that Dad has been eating less lately, and I'm worried." "Really? Is Dad not feeling well?" I asked. My dad has been a self-made businessman since his youth, the so-called entrepreneur. He's always been focused on work. When I was a child, I barely remember my dad playing with me on his days off. Even though I don't have many memories of him being around, I still worry about him. It bothers me to think that he might be working himself sick. Mom seemed hesitant to say anything, probably not wanting to worry me, but she finally opened up. "It's not an illness. Dad is perfectly healthy, but he's been acting distant lately. He's been criticizing dinner and making comments about how plain my clothes are." Why would he say such things? I thought, it's awful that he would say that to Mom, who has always been the heart of our home. But Mom brushed it off, saying, "I'm fine. Maybe Dad is just a bit stressed from starting a new business." She insisted she was okay, and although I was still concerned, we let the conversation fade and got back to cooking. Today, we plan to prepare a special meal, including Dad's favorite steak and pie as a way to support his new business venture. Adam, my husband, was busy as usual, unable to relax until everything was spotless. He's very particular about cleanliness, and even when it's just family, he always makes sure the entrance and living room are perfectly clean before we have guests. As I started tidying up the garden, Dad, my mother-in-law Teresa, and my father-in-law Eric arrived. "Jessica, can I have a word?" Teresa called out to me just as I was checking the pan to cook the steak. She looked serious as she walked into the kitchen, and without saying a word, she handed me a box that looked like a gift. Puzzled, I took it, and when I opened it, I saw the logo of a famous steak restaurant. Inside were thick, high-quality steaks with a mouth-watering aroma. It turned out that we had accidentally prepared the same dish. I thought it would be easy enough to just cook fewer steaks. After all, it wasn't the first time our gifts had coincidentally matched. I smiled and said, "Wow, did you go out of your way to buy this?" "We heard it was a celebration, but you could have told us about the steaks. This is a bit awkward. Should we just serve the gifted steaks today?" Teresa replied, "But you and Adam can still eat them, right? We're not young anymore, and too much meat can be a bit heavy on our stomachs." I found myself speechless. Everyone in the family is nearing 50, and it felt wrong to prepare so much food only for it to go to waste, especially after Mom had helped with the preparations. "You should have said something. How thoughtless," Teresa remarked as she left the kitchen. Her comment surprised me, but she didn't notice my reaction as she walked out with the steaks. It was the first time anyone had said something like that to me. We never coordinated gifts before, and even when we ended up giving the same thing, we usually laughed about it. In the past, our gifts had always been sweets or similar items. I felt a bit uneasy, but I thought maybe the expensive gift had upset her, so I didn't think about it too much. At the dinner party, Dad was thrilled with the steak from the high-end restaurant. Mom seemed to understand my situation with just a glance, and without mentioning the steaks we had prepared, pretended to be just as happy. After Teresa, Eric, and Dad left, Mom cleverly used the leftover ingredients to make beef stew before they were cooked. "We could have still had the steak," I said. "You both would have gotten tired of steak." "This way, you can take it home," Mom replied, packing her share in a food container. Although I felt a little bad, the beef stew Mom made was delicious and I quickly finished it off as the flavors blended together. Later, I heard that despite how tasty the stew was, Dad complained about it, calling it outdated. I was furious, but ended up just holding onto those feelings, unable to resolve them, especially when Mom just gave a small, sad smile. A few weeks after that dinner party, I got an unexpected message from Adam. He was supposed to be away on an overnight business trip, but it had been canceled due to changes on the client's side. He told me he would be coming home as usual. Since he was supposed to be away for 5 days, I had planned to spend some time at my parents' house, but with him coming home, my plans changed. I called my mom to let her know, and then met up with Adam to head home together. When we arrived home, I noticed something strange. "Did we forget to turn off the lights?" I asked, feeling sure that I had turned everything off before we left. The light was on near the entrance, and concerned about the waste of electricity, I apologized. But Adam reassured me, saying, "Don't worry about it," as he inserted the key into the front door. Then he suddenly fell silent. "What's wrong?" I asked. "The front door is unlocked," Adam replied, making me freeze. Thinking it might be a burglar, I quietly took out my phone and started recording. I nodded to signal Adam, and he slowly opened the front door. "Whose shoes are these?" he asked, pointing to a pair of men's leather shoes and women's pumps in the entryway. It was clear these shoes didn't belong to us. If these were Adam's shoes, and he wasn't here right now, I might have suspected he was cheating by bringing another woman home. But since he was right here next to me, it meant someone we didn't know was in our house. Sensing my worry, Adam grabbed his umbrella, ready to use it if needed, and moved forward. We noticed the living room light was on, and there was food scattered on the table, as if someone had bought it recently. This didn't seem like something a burglar would do, I thought. Then I heard a voice getting closer, and it became clear the sound was coming from the bathroom. Whoever was speaking was inside the bathroom. The voice was rough and unsettling, and I could see why Adam was so creeped out. It was disturbing to think that someone was using our home without us knowing. Curious and worried about who could be doing this, I slowly opened the bathroom door and immediately saw some clothes thrown around. "Ah!" I gasped, unable to hold back the sound. The clothes were unmistakably my dad's. His large jacket, neatly hung on a hanger, was the one he had worn at the dinner party just the other day. The shirt and pants, carelessly discarded, were all too familiar. Mom had left just a few hours ago, so there was no way she could be here. It looked like Dad had brought another woman into my home for an affair. The realization made me frown as I looked up at Adam, wondering how I could explain this to him. He was staring, pale-faced, at a necklace resting on top of the washing machine. I recognized the necklace and the earrings beside it. They belonged to my mom. This can't be Mom. Adam's words confirmed it. The people using our home for their affair were my dad and Teresa. I pulled Adam, who seemed ready to burst in on them, back to the living room. Moving away from the echoing voices seemed to help him calm down a bit. "Shouldn't we call your mom and my dad?" Adam suggested, though he seemed unsure. The thought of bringing Mom and Eric here now felt like it would lead to a crisis for both families, but I couldn't just ignore what was happening. The vulgar noises were still coming from the bathroom, suggesting they wouldn't come out anytime soon. I contacted Mom, and Adam reached out to Eric right away. "It's about Dad," Adam said. "Your dad told me he was going golfing today. He left early this morning and won't be back until tonight. Should I tell him to call you when he gets back?" "It seems that Dad is at home with Teresa," I said, unable to mention what was actually happening in the bathroom. But that was enough for Mom to understand the seriousness of the situation. In a tense voice, she said, "I'll be right there," and hung up. Less than 20 minutes later, Mom arrived, looking pale, with Eric right behind her, utterly bewildered. The voices had stopped, but we could still hear the shower running. Thankfully, the loud voices that had filled the hallway earlier were no longer heard. "Adam, what do you mean Teresa is here?" "I told you, Mom went on a day trip with friends and won't be back until tonight," Eric asked, full of questions. We had informed him that Dad was with someone, but whether he was confused or just didn't want to accept it, he avoided looking toward the bathroom. Feeling sorry for Eric, Adam signaled to me, and I started recording on my phone again. Adam made no effort to hide his approach as he stormed into the bathroom. "Hey, what the heck are you doing in our house?" Adam shouted as he pushed the room door open, making a dull sound. Screams from Dad and Teresa were followed by loud arguing between Dad and Adam. Adam, now standing in the doorway, grumbled in disgust. I grabbed a bath towel and tossed it into the bathroom, desperately wanting to avoid seeing them naked. I really didn't want to see that. Behind me, Mom, no longer able to hold back, pushed past me and stormed into the bathroom. She shoved Adam and Teresa aside and, with a voice I'd never heard from her before, dragged Dad out of the room. Eric, finally mustering his courage, followed Mom into the bathroom and pulled Teresa out. Both of them hurriedly dressed in their scattered clothes, and within minutes, they were sitting in the hallway with their hair still damp. All of us, including me, were panting heavily, our shoulders rising and falling with each breath. Mom broke the silence with a thin voice. "Why?" Her question was the start of Dad and Teresa's explanations. It all began with Teresa developing a crush on Dad. And since Dad is a company president, he has connections with some flashy industries. He pays much more attention to his appearance than most men his age, and even I have to admit he looks stylish and sophisticated. Teresa reportedly fell for Dad the moment they met, captivated by his demeanor. Their relationship started to grow during the family gatherings we organized for Adam's and my wedding. Teresa, trying to show herself as a good person, eagerly took charge of planning the dinner parties, gradually getting closer to Dad. At one of these dinner parties, she finally worked up the courage to confess her feelings. Adam, looking sick to his stomach, glared at Teresa, but Dad was also part of the problem. He was drawn to Teresa, who dressed in bold makeup and flashy clothes, exuding a feminine allure, in contrast to Mom, who quietly took care of the home. But both Dad and Teresa had their own families. Mom often worked at the same company as Dad, and on Dad's days off, Eric usually had a similar schedule, so they needed a place to meet in secret. Surprisingly, they chose our home. Adam and I have a hobby of taking short trips and staying at nearby hotels during long weekends, which inadvertently gave them the opportunity. Teresa would say, "It's not safe to leave the house empty for too long, so I'll check on it," as a way to confirm our absence. Then she would contact Dad. Since we were neighbors and often shared our plans without suspicion, our house became their secret meeting place. We never gave them a spare key, thinking it was impossible for them to enter, but it seems they secretly took a key during one of the dinner parties and made a copy. They were careful to leave no trace of their presence in our house. They brought their own food, took all the trash with them, collected any hair from the drain after using the bathroom, and wiped down any moisture before leaving. This time, Dad contacted Teresa after hearing that I was going back to my parents' house because of Adam's business trip. I had only informed Mom about the change in plans, leading to this unexpected encounter. If we hadn't discovered it now, who knows how long we would have been deceived. Naturally, both Dad and Teresa were served with divorce papers by their spouses. They faced claims for compensation during the divorce proceedings and were disowned by Adam and me. Although Dad and Teresa initially admitted to what they had done, they later claimed we were lying and had no evidence. However, I had recorded everything on my phone, and when I presented that as evidence, the divorce proceedings went smoothly. With the settlement money, we moved into a new apartment. Adam, who already had a bit of a germophobia, developed a complete aversion to the room after that day and now refuses to even go near it. I also found it too painful to keep living in a house that had been used for their affair, so I fully agreed to move. Now Mom, who has lost all love for Dad, lives with us after the divorce was finalized. Teresa, on the other hand, seemed quite pleased with herself. She became openly defiant, maybe influenced by Dad, and accepted the divorce settlement and compensation without much resistance. She moved in with Dad right after the divorce, and they got married, finally getting what they wanted being together. It seemed like everything was going perfectly for them, with Teresa becoming the wife of a company president and looking forward to a great life ahead. However, their plans quickly went wrong. Dad's new business venture failed, and the company's performance rapidly declined, like a balloon losing air. When Mom heard about this, she simply nodded, as if to say it was expected. "Who do you think was holding everything together all this time?" she said. It was Mom who had been quietly managing the complaints about Dad's harsh business tactics, both inside and outside the company, and supporting the business behind the scenes. She handled a major part of the company's finances and dealt with clients. Naturally, she resigned from the company when the divorce happened, and Dad, eager to get rid of her, didn't ensure a proper handover. As a result, the company was left with unhappy employees, and many of them followed Mom's lead and resigned, causing a staffing shortage. Dad had always believed that it was a wife's duty to support her husband, so he naturally expected Teresa to take over Mom's role. However, Teresa, who had always been a housewife, didn't understand the business at all and was of no help. The mass resignation of employees, fueled by the scandal of Dad's divorce, became widespread gossip, and clients began to pull out from Dad's company, citing poor performance. Dad's company couldn't last even half a year and soon went bankrupt. Their house and assets were seized, and they were left with significant debt, including unpaid wages. They managed to find a place in a cheap apartment, living a difficult life. Despite his age and wanting a company that would treat him as a president, Dad couldn't secure a new job. Naturally, his frustration grew, and he turned to gambling as a way to relieve his stress. But even that wasn't enough. He began to blame Teresa, saying, "None of this would have happened if it weren't for the affair. It was Teresa who seduced me." His anger led to him becoming violent towards Teresa. Teresa, struggling to make ends meet with part-time jobs and desperately trying to support Dad, grew disillusioned with him as their situation worsened. He sank deeper into his gambling addiction, wasting even the money they needed for living expenses. Unable to bear Dad's constant verbal abuse, Teresa eventually fled the apartment. She ended up at Eric's house, where Adam had grown up. Adam and I happened to be visiting Eric, who had become somewhat reclusive due to the emotional strain of the divorce, so we often checked in on him. When we found the front door open, we walked in to see who was there and were met by Teresa. At first, we didn't recognize her. She looked so different that we thought an old woman we didn't know was speaking to us. The once well-groomed Teresa was unrecognizable, now looking worn out. Teresa tried to apologize and seek forgiveness for what she had done in the past, but all I could do was give her a bitter look, thinking it was too convenient for her to ask for forgiveness now. Eric must have been quite shocked to see her, yet he seemed somewhat moved by the return of the woman he once loved. While he was trying to figure out how to ask her to leave, Adam, standing next to him, suddenly clutched his mouth and crouched down. Remembering Teresa's affair in our room, he couldn't hold it in and vomited right there. In a panic, Eric and I rushed to get a trash can and water, and we heard Adam's cries of rejection toward Teresa from behind his back. Feeling sorry for Adam and unsure how to handle the situation, it was Eric who took action. He looked Teresa straight in the eyes and firmly told her there was no chance of reconciliation. "Leave," he said, sending Teresa away with strong words. Teresa seemed deeply affected by her own son's rejection, especially seeing how sick it made him. Without saying another word, she stumbled out the front door and left. Since that incident, Teresa has kept her distance from Eric, and there has been no contact from either Dad or Teresa. It seems our ties with them have been completely severed. Adam was under the weather for a few days, but he has since recovered, and together, we are focused on building a warm and loving home. Mom has shown incredible strength. She quickly found work, made new friends, and is moving on from Dad to enjoy her life. She's planning to rent an apartment for herself once she has saved enough, and I hope she chooses one close to our home. As for Eric, he seems to have brightened up a bit after adopting a stray cat that wandered into his yard. Taking in that one cat has led to more cats gathering at his place, and now it's known in the neighborhood as a popular hangout for cats. The ordeal caused by Dad and Teresa involved the whole family in a tough situation, but those of us who remain have strengthened our bonds and are doing